بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم، إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم. تنزيل العزيز الرحيم، لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون. لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون. إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون. وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون. وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب، فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم، وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون، إذ أرسلنا إليهم 2 فكذبوهما فعززنا ب3 فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون. قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون. قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد. بقي مفتوح. Keep it open. Keep it open. Keep it open. Yeah, it's good.
أحسنت. صلى على محمد وعلى محمد. And now for our English presentation, Dr. Sayyid Jaafar Al-Hasany with your loudest salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bifinaik. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Respected sisters, dear brothers, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The title for tonight's lecture is The Abandoned Quran. In what sense is the Quran present in our lives? And in what sense is the Holy Quran abandoned in our lives? In what sense is the Holy Quran present in the world and absent or abandoned in the world? Our religion has said, our Holy Prophet has said, I am leaving behind me two things that are of great value and great importance. The first of these is the Holy Quran. And the Holy Prophet referred to it as a firm rope of rescue. And the Holy Prophet said, this rope of rescue has two ends. One of them is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in heavens, and the other side of this rope of rescue is for us human beings to hold on to. This is how the Holy Prophet described the Holy Quran. It is a rope of rescue. You want to be rescued in this world, you attach yourself to this rope. It's a firm rope, al-urwat al-wuthqa, a rope that never breaks. It'll never rip. It'll never fail you if you attach yourself to it. This is the description that the Holy Prophet gave of the Holy Quran. We have to start by looking at our relationship with the Holy Quran. First, what kind of relationship can we potentially have with the Holy Quran? At a very superficial level, at a first level, we have to assess ourselves to see, are we even capable of opening the Holy Quran and reciting it? This may seem to be very trivial, but it is not. And it's not actually a lot of hard work. With a little bit of time, on a daily basis, perhaps 5-10 minutes a day, in a consistent way, it can be very easy for anyone to learn to recite the Holy Quran appropriately. That's the first layer and a first type of relationship with the Holy Quran. I am actually able to open it and recite some verses of the Quran correctly. Beyond this, to what extent do I know some of the verses of the Quran? And this means that I carry them in my heart and I can recite them at any time. I memorize some parts of the Holy Quran. How present is the Holy Quran to me with its own words in my mind, in my heart? That's another layer of associating with the Holy Quran. To what extent do I understand what the Holy Quran says? That I am actually capable of saying the Holy Quran says this about this topic, says that about this topic. Do I know what the Holy Quran says? If I were to be asked today, you're a Muslim, right? The Quran is your book. What does the Holy Quran say about family relationships? Would you be able to actually quote the Holy Quran? Give a couple of verses from the Quran that specifically say this is what the Quran says about family relationships, relationships with the parents, with the cousins, with the next of kin. What does the Quran say about a relationship with our neighbors? Do we know any verses? Not in general. We can say Islam in general says, and I think, and I've heard. That's different. Can you actually say what the Quran says? Can we say this is what the Quran says are the clear instructions in how do I interact with nature, with the environment, which is such a big topic today? How I'm supposed to carry myself in society? Or much deeper notions. What is the Quranic theory in general about finance or politics? This would be a much deeper layer and a much deeper level of understanding of the Quran. And then finally, and perhaps most difficultly and most importantly, to what extent can I actually say that I live by the teachings of the Holy Quran? That the Quran is present and I try to live my life based on the teachings of the Holy Quran. These would be at a very individual level where I need to assess my life based on the Holy Quran. None of us do enough, by the way, in any of this. And this is therefore a call to action, not to feel hopeless and desperate and feel like you're not going to be able to accomplish any of it, so I accomplish none of it. This is just a reminder from our religion. This is what our religion says about the Holy Quran. When we go to the Holy Prophet ﷺ and he talked about the Quran, he says that we're supposed to start our relationship with the Quran as early as possible in our lives. Which again, does not mean that if I'm 80 years old now and I don't know anything about the Quran that it's too late. It just means that if I want to take full advantage of the Holy Quran, with my full capability, then I should start as soon as possible. Perhaps even before I'm fully aware. The Holy Prophet says the child has a number of rights over the father. One of the rights is that the father teaches the child good manners and teaches the child the love of Ahlul Bayt and teaches the child the Holy Quran. This is even before the child is making conscious decisions for themselves. Beyond that, the Holy Prophet says when a human being is very young and they consistently recite the Holy Quran all the time, the Holy Quran starts to mix with their blood and flesh, the Prophet says. They become part of them and they stay with them for life. And he adds in the same hadith, and on the day of resurrection, when he is brought up, the Quran will act as his shafi'ah. The Quran will act as his intercessor. The Quran says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can't punish this person because they recited the Quran. This is where we have to start thinking about ourselves and our families. How present is the Quran in our family life? Does the Quran hold any space in our family life? And if it doesn't, we can all, regardless of our age, we can contribute to that. We can create a habit. We can make it a family trend within our family to sit together and recite a few verses of the Quran, or to discuss some of the meanings of the Quran. One verse, one story from the Quran. The Holy Prophet ﷺ says, the house in which the Holy Quran is recited shines to the people of the heavens, the angels, like the stars and the planets shine to the people of the earth. This is what it looks like as a house for the angels. And it pushes away evil, and it keeps the devils away, and it brings the blessings of God. And this is why we have to make an effort individually, and we have to make an effort as families that the Quran has a presence in our lives. There's a lot more that we can say about or ask about how present is the Holy Quran in our communities. How much space does the Holy Quran, the teaching, the understanding of the Holy Quran has in our communities? That could be a topic by itself. How much have we done to present the Holy Quran to the world? I would say not much. I don't know how many of you go to university and spend time in university libraries, specifically libraries. I've spent a lot of time in university libraries. Any library you go to has a section of reference. Reference works are the works that you can't take out, right? They stay in the university at all times. You can't borrow them because anyone might use them at any time. They're your dictionaries and your encyclopedias. No one should be taking these out. They're works of reference. Go to the section about the Quran and the works of reference. You will see a beautiful encyclopedia pretty much in every university. Multiple volumes. I've gone through it. Very well written. Hundreds of scholars, specialists, each of them writing in his field, in her field. Every aspect and every term of the Quran and every term in Islam that is mentioned in the Quran has an entry. 10, 12 volume encyclopedia. Except what is not said in that encyclopedia is that there's an assumption. This whole beautiful work around the Quran has an assumption, which is the person that we call Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is in fact a man. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He's simply a man who had this genius, who lived in the Arabian Peninsula, and he was aware of the teachings of the Jews and the Christians. And so he took these teachings from the Jews and the Christians and he retold them and translated them to the Arabs of his time based on his own culture and in his own language. This is the version of Quranic teachings that you get in university as a reference tool. Every aspect, every term, every notion of the Quran is presented with this assumption. No one is going to tell you this, by the way. You have to dig for it. This is an example. Why isn't it an Islamic scholar who has their works in the reference section? Where are our Islamic scholars? Those who are capable of studying and being in religious philosophy and religious studies. And so this is where we see that there's a lot of work that we can do, each at our own level. Those of us who are capable of becoming specialists, who are interested in these fields, you see how much work there is. And if you're not a specialist, there's still work, a lot of work to be done to present the Quran to the rest of the world. More than all of this, when I look at myself and how I interact with the Holy Quran gives indications or levels of interaction with the Quran. This is another test. At one level, I can say I know what's in the Quran. I'm familiar, I have an acquaintance with the Quran. If someone asks me, generally speaking, how many chapters in the Quran, what do they talk about, I've done my homework, I know this. That's one layer. Unfortunately, even that is often missing, which means we got to get to work. But that's a first layer. This is what we've been talking about. All of this is first layer. Second layer. The Holy Quran says there are people, when they recite the Holy Quran, they feel pleasure and peace. I have to ask myself, when I recite the Quran, do I feel pleasure and peace? If I don't, I have work to do. I have to get to know the Quran a lot better. There's yet another layer. There's a lot of layers. I'm only mentioning 3 now. There's another layer higher than this one. The Quran says the believer, when he or she recites the Quran, they feel a divine mercy and a healing. When you're feeling down and depressed and lonely and sad and you need healing, do you turn to the Quran? And do you feel that the Quran is healing you? The Quran is very clear. It says, we descend, we reveal from this Quran what is a divine mercy and a healing. ننزل من القرآن ما هو شفاء ورحمة. Condition للمؤمنين. You have to be a believer. If I don't feel that when I'm reciting the Quran, I have work to do. The Quran is very clear. It's not putting any other conditions. If I'm not feeling that, I'm not reciting the Quran, or there's something missing in my relationship with the Quran. So I have to work on that. I want to end this part of the lecture and move on to the next with a line that deserves a very lengthy discussion that we will not have today. I know all of you will understand the meaning of the line. I want to take that line from the deathbed of our Imam Ali alayhi salam. When Imam Ali alayhi salam is on his deathbed, he leaves a number of wills. This one was written down officially as one of the wills of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And sometimes we say, well, a will may be specific. The Imam was very clear when he stated that will. He initially began this section by saying, this is a will to Imam Hassan and Hussein, and a will to all of my family members, and a will to anyone who hears this will. This is all of us. We want to be the followers of Imam Ali alayhi salam. It's a long will. Inshallah, another day we go through it piece by piece. And at some point the Imam enumerates 10 things in a row. He talks about the orphans, and then he talks about the neighbors, and he says, Allah, Allah bil Quran. فَلَا يَسْبِقَنَّكُمْ بِالْعَمَلِ بِهِ غَيْرُكُمْ. He doesn't say act based on the Quran. He doesn't say learn the Quran. Your Imam, this is Imam Ali alayhi salam on his deathbed. I'm sure any of us would say, I'll do anything you want, just tell me. This is one of the things the Imam says. He says, do not let anyone act before you or more than you when it comes to the Quran. Don't be second when it comes to the Quran. What does this mean? It means everything. It means when it comes to the reciting of the Quran, I should be the best. Memorizing the Quran, I should be the best. Acting based on the Quran, I should be the best. If I'm a follower of Imam Ali alayhi salam. This is his will. These are his last words in this world. He says, do not let anyone be better than you when it comes to working on the Quran. And this means everything, working in every way. لا يسبقنكم بالعمل به غيركم. Do not let anyone be better than you when it comes to the Quran. I think this is clear. We don't need to explain it more. Let's move to the second part of the lecture. We said there's two meanings. The Quran is abandoned by ourselves. We have to assess based on what we just said. And the Quran is abandoned in the world. What does that mean? I want to take you back to when the Holy Quran was revealed. From the moment the Holy Prophet ﷺ started to recite the first verses of the Holy Quran to the people of Mecca, did all of them greet these verses with open arms and love them and accept them? No. From the moment the first verses of the Holy Quran were revealed, there were people who attacked the Holy Quran and attacked the Holy Prophet. So today, if you see anyone attacking the Holy Quran or the Holy Prophet, there's nothing new there. This has lasted since the moment the first verse of the Holy Quran was revealed. This doesn't take away anything from the Holy Quran. But at the same time as this happens, we have always found that the more the Holy Quran is attacked, the more there are those who are interested objectively to study the Holy Quran. And they get attracted to the Quran. And the Quran has an effect on them, directly or indirectly. I wanted to talk about in a few minutes, because this could be a very long discussion, interesting discussion, but this is not the time to have it, about the place of the Holy Quran in today's modern world, to answer an important question. I want to take you back to perhaps a man that you wouldn't think I'm going to be talking about tonight. I want to take you back to Thomas Jefferson. He was born in the 1700s. He's considered to be one of the founders of the United States. He is one of the visionaries that came up with the idea of the first democracy in the world. Very influential, very significant for the history of the United States. And we're not interested here in the United States as much as we are interested in democracy. There were no democracies in the world officially yet. Why is he interesting? One of the reasons is because we are told by training, this is a man who was very educated and intellectual. He read a lot, and he had a large personal library in which he had a Quran. The translation of the Quran at that time, he had the best available one. For those who know the history of the translations of the Quran, there's a translation by George Sale. This was the first, we would say, good translation of the Holy Quran. A real attempt at presenting the Holy Quran in its language in the best possible way in English to the world. 2 volumes with a pretty good introduction, with good notes and so on and so forth. This is the version, the 2-volume version that Thomas Jefferson had. And he had read it, and he had written commentaries on the sides and the margins of the pages. And we're told that with time, the house in which he lived got burned. And so this copy of the Quran was damaged and lost. Thomas Jefferson went and bought another copy of the same Quran, and he also added more notes in the footnotes and the margins. And he used them for all sorts of reasons. He was preoccupied and concerned with a very important question in his time. The context of this question is that the majority of the people who had come to the United States, they had come from all sorts of countries in the world, many of them from Europe. Europe was being devastated by religious wars, especially inter-Christian wars between the different denominations of Christianity. You had the Catholics and the Protestants and the Anglicans and everything in between, and more denominations were emerging with time. And every one of these considered himself, herself to be the holder of the ultimate truth, and everyone else was a heretic, misguided, a disbeliever, and so on and so forth, and this led to constant warring. The people who are now in the United States were thinking about this land and how do we make it into a country. They wanted to try to avoid as much as possible those lessons, those mistakes that had led to these types of situations, so that they don't fall into the same mistakes. And so they were hard at work. One of them was Thomas Jefferson. And one of the things that were extremely important to him, and he had really very accurately pinpointed this, is religious freedom. And so he was interested in seeing, after studying the different religions, how do we create a society where people can actually coexist, live together, in a way where everyone keeps their religious freedom, and yet they are all equal citizens of this land. Today, it seems very trivial. At that time, it seemed impossible. A lot of people fought him. Some people fought him because they did not believe in this. Everyone was looking for the truth, and we're going to establish another country where religion is present. Other people fought him because this is simply impossible, not something realistic that we could even aspire to achieve. He maintained his position. He fought really hard for it. And at the end, he was able to pass a law. It was called the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, that later would become the First Amendment and would allow people in the United States, and the first democracy in the world, to have religious freedom. Why is this important? Because if we take it back to the initial vision of the people who were creating the modern state, the Western state, in their mind and in their idea, they're trying to answer a question. Today it's a very big question. A lot of people wonder, there's books and conferences about this question. In general, can religion coexist in a modern society or not? That's a very philosophical version of it. And to be even more precise, can Islam coexist in a modern society? Can Islam coexist in a real democracy? If you go back to the 1700s, to the people who were founding the first democracy, their vision of that democracy, it looks like they really spent a lot of time thinking about this very question. This is not a new question. And the answer that he had to this, and he explicitly writes this, he didn't keep it general. You go back to his writings and you see, he is explicitly talking about people who have a background that is Christian from other denominations, or a background that is Jewish, or a background that is Muslim. He explicitly writes this. And he says all those people are welcome here, and they would have equal rights as anyone else. And it goes both ways, he writes. I'm going to read the passage to you that became the law, the Virginia Statute. He says, on one side, the state cannot impose on any of its citizens what to think and what not to think, what to believe and what not to believe when it comes to religion. And on the other side, the state can also not prevent a citizen from adopting any religious point of view and therefore religious actions. The state should not be telling me what to wear if it's truly a modern democracy, if this has anything to do with religion. And the state should not be telling me how to raise my children if this is truly a modern democracy. This would be the implication of this. This is why he writes, "No man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship." You can't compel someone, you can't force someone to frequent or support any religious worship, any place or ministry whatsoever, nor shall be enforced, restrained, molested, burdened in his body or his goods, nor shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious opinions or belief. This is what he was writing. This was in 1777. This is when it became a law. And when he was asked, and he writes about this, he says, "The two things that I am most proud of in my life is that I founded the University of Virginia. That was a lot of work for him, and to have passed this specific law, which became the First Amendment, which is at the heart of democracy." We have a lot of work to do to make sure that the Quran, just like it was present in the life of Thomas Jefferson, and it affected him in this way, and I would argue that perhaps changed the world. Who doesn't want to live in a democracy if these are the conditions that are respected in the democracy? We all say, live and let live. Who wouldn't want this? He changed the world, I would say, forever. And all of this, I would argue again, under the influence of the Holy Quran. We have a lot of work to do to make sure that the Holy Quran does not remain abandoned in the world. And this is a dangerous thing. And if we look at the life of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, every time he is mentioned, every time we talk about the Holy Prophet, if there is one trait that should emerge, it was his mercy and his forgiveness, especially towards his own people, to the world, but to his own nation. In the worst of times, as insulting, as condescending, as harmful as they were to him, we all know the stories when the Holy Prophet went to Ta'if, for instance, leaving the oppression of Mecca behind, trying to find a place where else he could live. He went to Ta'if, where he was attacked from all sides. Pieces of wood, rocks thrown his way, his feet bleeding, his head bleeding. Finally, he lost consciousness. He fell and he lost consciousness. And when he woke up, the angels were there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling him, "Do you want to pray against your people?" And he said, "No. My God, forgive my people. They do not know any better." This is the Holy Prophet, the Holy Quran describes as Rahmatan lil Alameen. We have only sent you as a mercy to the worlds. The Holy Prophet never complains, right? There is one complaint. Go through the Holy Quran, you will find one complaint of the Holy Prophet. In Surah Al-Furqan, chapter 25, verse 30, the Holy Quran says, on the day of judgment, the Holy Prophet will come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, وَقَالَ الرَّسُولُ يَا رَبِّ إِنَّ قَوْمِ اتَّخَذُوا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ مَهْجُورًا. This is his complaint. My Lord, my people have abandoned this Quran, have deserted this Quran, have left this Quran behind them. This is the complaint of the Holy Prophet. The Holy Quran is not a book that we can only memorize. The Holy Quran is not a piece of art that we hang. The Holy Quran is not just a nice chant and melody. And there's nothing wrong with any of these things, but that's not the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran is a book of guidance. We learn it, we carry it, we understand what it is, we carry it in our hearts. It becomes who we are, and we live by it. This is what the Holy Quran wants from us. This is what the Holy Prophet wants from us. And inshallah, we don't fall in the category of those that the Holy Prophet is complaining about here. When we come to Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam, his entire life is a personification of this attachment to the Quran. In fact, we believe, and perhaps the best way to introduce this is to say, this is the inner meaning of this complaint of the Holy Prophet. When he complains to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that his people have deserted, have left behind, have not taken care of the Holy Quran. Remember how Imam Ali alayhi salam in the Battle of Siffin, he would cry out to his own followers who stopped listening to him and disobeying him. He would tell them, I am the Quran. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, I'm the Quran. I'm the living Quran in flesh and blood. Listen to me and obey what I say. And so this becomes another meaning when the Holy Prophet complains to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about how his nation has neglected the Quran. The personification of the Quran are his family members. Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam, we are told there's an entire PhD thesis on this. Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam in the time of Muawiyah would hold gatherings where he would teach the Quran. And Muawiyah did everything he can to prevent people from learning the Quran from Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam. Why? There's a lot of people who know the Quran, who teach the Quran, who recite the Quran, even in the time of Muawiyah. No, when it's Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam, it becomes a threat. Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam cannot be allowed to teach the Quran freely. He would send one of his governors and give him instructions to block the ways so that people coming from a far distance to study under Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam and learn the Quran from him would not be able to reach Imam Al-Hussein when he was in Medina. This lasted for years. The Imam would hold these gatherings where he would teach the Holy Quran, either explaining verses of the Quran or explaining the narrations of the Prophet by going back to the verses of the Quran. He would use Al-Walid ibn Utbah to block the roads so that people can't make it to the gatherings of Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam. And this is something that we notice. The attachment of Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam to the Holy Quran is something that we notice with his companions too. And if we talk about the companions of the Imam and the attachment to the Quran, I cannot but talk especially about a special companion of Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala, a man by the name of Habib ibn Mudahir. There are versions to his name that are a little different from the popular version. Habib is accepted, but some say his name is Habib ibn Mudahir or Mutahhar. In any case, we'll use the popular way of saying his name, Habib ibn Mudahir. Who was this man? In Karbala, we encounter him as a man of 75 years old with Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam. This is a man that history tells us may have been a companion of the Holy Prophet, although there are not a lot of details about it. He came to Kufa after Imam Ali alayhi salam moved to Kufa. Imam Ali used to live in Medina al-Munawwara until the people came to Imam Ali and basically forced the Imam to become their Khalifa after Uthman was killed. Imam Ali alayhi salam becomes a Khalifa in Medina al-Munawwara, and then right away some of those who had given their allegiance to the Imam betray the Imam, Talha and Zubayr and others, and they join Aisha and they create an army and they go to Basra to fight the Imam and revolt against his Khilafah right away. So the Imam takes an army and goes to Basra, and this is the Battle of the Camel. And the Imam defeats them. When the Imam defeats them in the Battle of the Camel in Basra, he does not return to Medina. He decides to change the capital of the Islamic world from Medina to Kufa, and he moves to Kufa. And that's a whole discussion of why the Imam strategically would do that. When he did that, his family members followed him in Kufa. And a lot of people started to come to live in Kufa because they wanted to be in this new state that Imam Ali alayhi salam is building. And that's when you start to see people like Habib ibn Mudahir, Muslim ibn Awsaja, many of the others who will next become some of the top leaders of Kufa. That's when they came to Kufa. Many of them were not originally inhabitants of Kufa. In any case, he lives with Imam Ali alayhi salam. He becomes a very close companion, a confidant. One more like Maytham al-Tammar. I don't have time to go through too much details right now. One more of these very close companions to the Imam who carry the secret knowledge. Right? Ilm al-manaya wal-balaya. He is one more of these people. Not every companion of the Imam is like this, by the way. Only a few that the Imam selects. Ammar ibn Yasir, we have narrations that say he is full of belief from the tip of his head to the tip of his toes. He doesn't carry this knowledge of al-manaya wal-balaya. Okay, so the Imam chooses carefully who carries these types of knowledge, such as Mitham al-Tammar, such as Habib ibn Mudahir, such as many others, Rushayd al-Hajari, a few others mentioned in the narrations. In any case, we fast forward. This man who was one of the Shurtat al-Khamis under Imam Ali alayhi salam. Sometimes when we say this word in Arabic, people think that they were the police officers of the Thursday. This is not what it means. Shurtat al-Khamis, Imam Ali alayhi salam had an army. And you can imagine the people, some of the commanders, some of the leaders in the army of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Within that army, there are special forces. There's a SWAT team, special forces. They had a special attire that they wore, and they had to be ready 24/7 for the Imam to send them on specific missions. They were very carefully chosen. Al-Khamis here, it means the army. They were the special forces of the army. Al-Khamis comes from Takhmis. The army is made up of 5 parts: the front, the rear, the left, the right, and the center. Okay, so it has nothing to do with Thursday. He was part of them. He was part of those special forces. He fought the 3 battles of Imam Ali alayhi salam with him. Imam Ali alayhi salam is martyred in Kufa. He remains in Kufa. The years go by until Muawiyah dies. He gets together with the leaders of Kufa in the house of Sulaiman ibn Sarad al-Khuza'i, the leader of the repenters, of the Tawabun that we mentioned. Later he would become their leader. They write to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Imam al-Hussein receives their letters when he is in Mecca. He has left Medina, he receives their letters. Muslim ibn Awsa, Hani ibn Urwa, Habib ibn Mudahir, and others. This is when he dispatches his cousin, Muslim ibn Aqil. He sends him to Kufa to see the affairs. As we said, Muslim lands in Kufa in the house initially of Mukhtar, and then he moves into the houses of Bani Asad. And Habib ibn Mudahir is in the tribe of Bani Asad. Muslim ibn Awsaja and Habib ibn Mudahir and others. So he's definitely playing a role, gathering the companions of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam very quickly. As we said, at least 18,000 was gathered for the Imam. That's when Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad enters. Al-Mukhtar leaves. Everyone who he can kill or he can imprison is imprisoned by Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad at that time. By the time Al-Mukhtar comes back, Muslim ibn Aqil has been killed, Hani ibn Urwa has been killed. He is captured and thrown in jail. Al-Mukhtar remains in jail after the tragedy of Karbala. And while he's in jail, this is when the captives of Karbala are taken to Kufa. And he witnesses the captives and he cries and he hits his head in guilt over Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. In any case, we come back to Habib. Once Ubaydullah enters into Kufa, this is when Habib ibn Mudahir goes into hiding or is forced into hiding by Bani Asad. They want to protect this very valuable, important man in their tribe. He remains in hiding during this time. In the same time, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam has now arrived at Karbala. He's heading towards Karbala and he reaches Karbala. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam starts to organize his army in Karbala. He begins by explaining that the person who is going to carry his big flag is going to be none other than Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. But within the army there are smaller flags, there are banners. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam organizes his army into 12 parts, 12 banners under the general flag. And he starts to give the banners to each one of the leaders who will carry them and give instructions to them, and he leaves one banner aside. And it's a great honor and pride to carry one of the banners. Imam Hussein alayhi salam tells them the owner of this banner has not arrived yet. He will arrive soon and he will take it. And this is getting very late. The war may erupt at any time. They wait. Imam Hussein alayhi salam writes a letter to Habib ibn Mudahir in this context. The letter says a lot about a lot of things. First and foremost, it tells us the arguments that Imam Hussein alayhi salam used to tell Habib ibn Mudahir to come. Notice the arguments. We don't have time to explain them, I'll mention them. Each one of them is 2 words. Secondly, the letter tells us how Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam views this man. What is the opinion of Imam al-Hussein of Habib ibn Mudahir? And thirdly, more practically for us, imagine yourself receiving this letter from your Imam. What would your position be? Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam writes his letter to Habib ibn Mudahir. He says, من الحسين ibn Ali إلى الرجل الفقيه Habib ibn Mudahir. The first praise and the first argument. Imam al-Hussein says, from al-Hussein, son of Ali, to the great scholar. This is a testimony from Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam who this man is. The Imam says this is a faqih. And then he says, أما بعد يا حبيب فأنت تعلم قرابتنا من رسول الله. First argument. You know our family ties to the Prophet. Secondly, and you know who we are better than anyone else. Second argument. Third argument, وَأَنْتَ ذُو شِيمَةٍ وَغِيرَةٍ. You are a man of honor and dignity. Each one of these is a separate argument. For each one of these reasons, you should be joining me. What's the request from Imam al-Hussein? What's the request from your Imam? The Imam says, and I want you to give up your soul generously for me. He says, فَلَا تَبْخَلْ عَلَيْنَا بِنَفْسِكَ. And the reward, in return, my grandfather, the messenger of God, will reward you himself on the day of judgment. Habib ibn Mudahir, he receives this letter, he leaves, he finds a way to get out of Kufa that was completely and entirely shut down at that time. He finds a way to reach Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, perhaps around the 5th of Muharram. When he reaches, there's a great commotion and a great happiness in the camp of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam that Habib has finally arrived. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, before he arrives, he tells them, stand and greet the owner of this banner. Finally, he has come. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was extremely happy to see him. They hugged and they cried. The Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, she hears a commotion. She asks her nephew, Ali al-Akbar, what is going on? What is this commotion? He tells her, my uncle Habib has now joined my father Hussein. Zainab alayhi salam sends her first salam to Habib in that instance. We fast forward, Habib notices that there are very few people with Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, much fewer than he thought. He tries to go convince some people from Bani Asad, from his tribe who lived in near villages from Karbala, to join Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. They agree and they come out with him and they want to join Imam al-Hussein. Umar ibn Sa'ad dispatches a part of the army to block them from coming to reach Imam al-Hussein. They fight for about a day and then they give up and they go back to their houses. And Habib ibn Mudahir finds a way to come back once again to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam all alone. We will skip the part of the next couple of days until the night of the 9th, the eve of Muharram. This is where we see one of the positions of Habib ibn Mudahir. We are told that Nafi' ibn Hilal says, when it was night, the eve of Muharram, the companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salam retreated back into their tents, many of them worshipping Allah, many of them preparing themselves for war, some of them joking around. He says, I was always looking watchful over Imam Hussein alayhi salam, afraid that he may be ambushed in this middle of the night. He says, I followed the Imam and suddenly I noticed the Imam leave his tent and he would recite verses of the Quran walking in the darkness, picking things from the ground. He says, I continued to follow the Imam, not sure what he's doing, until the Imam noticed me and called me. And then the Imam explained to him that he's simply picking up thorns and rocks so that when all the men are killed and the children will run in the camp, that they will not be hurt by the thorns and the rocks in the ground. And then they go back to the tent. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam enters the tent and he is greeted by Zainab. Nafi' says, I stood by the side, watching, making sure the Imam doesn't need anything. He says, and I heard Zainab tell Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, have you truly tested all of your followers? Are you sure that they are going to remain with you until the end? And Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam answered her, telling her, I have tested each and every one of them. Their hearts are filled with bravery. And none of them, all of them are going to be more happy to meet their death for my sake than a child who is hungry, who is about to drink their milk. He says, but when I heard these words from Zainab, I started to cry. and I got confused and I don't know what to do, that Zainab is not sure of us. So I ran all the way to the leader of the followers of Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam, Shaykh Al-Ansar, Habib ibn Mudahir. He was in his tent without a turban, fixing his sword, reciting verses of the Quran. I told him, Uncle Habib, this is not the time to do this. The women in the family of the Holy Prophet are not sure of us. They have doubts about us. So the historians say Habib ibn Mudahir left the tent and stood in the middle of the camp of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and he raised his voice and he said, O warriors of the desert, O lions of the battlefields. And they all came rushing out of their tents, led by Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. He came out without sandals, without a turban, carrying his sword, saying, Labbayka am ya Habib. We hear and we obey, my uncle Habib. What is it that you need from us? He said, Abbas, Bani Hashim, it is not you that I am addressing. Go back and rest. May God not keep your eyes up at night. Go and rest. I want to talk to the followers and companions of Imam al-Hussein. And then he told them, Zainab and the women and the children, they are unsure of us. They have doubts about us. Let's go and make sure that we make them happy and we appease their hearts. They came to the tent, they stood, and Habib stood at the tent where Zainab and Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam were still discussing, and he raised his voice and he said, Assalamu alaikum ya Ahl Bayt al-Nubuwah. May God peace be upon you, household of the Prophet. These are your slaves. They have committed that they will not let go of their spears until they put them in the hearts of your enemies. And they will not let go of their swords until they are in the skulls of those attacking you. Zainab alayhi salam heard this, and she told Habib, thank you for everything you are saying. My only request from you is that Allah bihadal gharib. Don't leave Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam a lonely man here until the end. On the 10th of Ashura, the next day, the battle erupts. It lasts until the prayer of noon. Habib ibn Mudahir was killed right before or right after this time. And some, Tabari and others say, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is about to start praying. There are people who came, Al-Husayn ibn Numayr and others, and they said to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, God will never accept this prayer from you. These words were too much for Habib to bear. So he answered them back, and then he charged at the army. He was attacked from all sides. He fought valiantly and bravely until he was injured, hit on his head, he fell to the ground, and then he was beheaded right away on the field, on the battlefield. People were racing to have the honor to have killed Habib ibn Mudahir. In the narrations we are told, you read the Maqtal, they say when Habib ibn Mudahir was killed, هَدَّ مَقْتَلُهُ الْحُسَيْنِ. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam lost all of his strength when he saw Habib ibn Mudahir die in this way. And he said, what an amazing man you were, Habib. May God have mercy on your soul. You were one of those who recited the entire Quran every night of your life. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Assalamu ala al-Husayn wa ala Ali ibn al-Husayn wa ala awlad al-Husayn wa ala ashab al-Husayn wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi al-tayyibin al-tahirin.
قم إلينا فعلينا الدهر يا مولاي جار. قم إلينا فيك قلب العاشق الواله حار. قم إلينا مولاي يا فرج الله. كم ندبنا بحزن واشتياق، كم ندبنا سنينا من فراق. قل متى سيدي يوم التلاقي. كم جرعنا المآسي والعذاب. قلبنا يا حبيب القلب ذاب. دونك العيش هم واغتراب. قم إلينا. ضاقت الأرض بنا يا ابن السماء، مهدي يا نصير الأبرياء والضعفاء، مهدي ما لنا غيرك عون في البلاء، مهدي روحنا يا ملاذ الروح حيران، منك هيهات على الأوجاع صبرا، منك هبها على الأوجاع صبرا. أنت بالحال يا مولاي أدرى، يا أبا صالح سيدي روحنا الولهى فداك، دمع ندباتنا الجاري دعاك، فمتى سترانا ونراك؟